All right, we are on air live. It is Thursday, February 12th, and we're here to have a quick check-in on development tasks for Backdrop Core and other related items that we're working on at the same time. We're going to start with a quick update from the PMC. Nate, did you want to let everyone know about our latest security release?
Yeah, so let's see. We had another point release yesterday, which unfortunately we ended up making two releases yesterday because we had a little bit of an issue with the first one. But yesterday we had our first coordinated security release with the Drupal team, which was really fantastic. As you may know, the Drupal security team has been really kind and has offered to let us have access to all of the security issues that are currently outstanding for Drupal 7. And that way we can work together to coordinate, to fix and to coordinate the releases for them. So in this case, this wasn't actually a Drupal 7 bug, it was a bug in views. There were two security issues in views. And so a new version of views came out yesterday, and at the same time, within about an hour, we had also released a new version of Backdrop that included those same fixes. You can get the list of security updates, since this is the first one we've ever had. Anyone that's curious, you can get the list of security updates at backdropcms.org/security. There's also a link down in the footer for security information, and that's where you can read about the issues that we fixed yesterday. Besides the views issue, there was also a problem in layouts, so we had our own reason to make a release anyway. So it's just kind of convenient that views also had a couple issues that we could fix at the same time. I also wanted to say we got this awesome dragon sent to us here, which I think is pretty sweet. Lullabot sent it. We got it in a box this morning. It was pretty awesome.
Good morning.
Yeah, so yeah, it's pretty close too. Like, I mean, Drop doesn't actually have a gold belly, but
He could. He can change his colors.
But he could. He's got great paw-like hands and feet and stuff like that. He's very non-threatening. So I think that was a good match as far as lining up toys with Drop goes.
He's from Amazon. If anyone wants to try and find him.
Yeah, he's made by Douglas Toy Company. Let's see. Was there anything else PMC-wise that we wanted to say?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I got.
All right. Well, the next thing we want to talk about is how our little community is doing. And it's been, let's see, exactly a month today since we released Backdrop 1.0. So that's exciting. We have, according to Nate's latest update, 22 total people who have applied to be part of the Backdrop Contrib group, and we have a total of 35 projects that have been ported, so modules, themes, layouts, already in that repository, which is pretty good. I know there's a bunch of people working on other stuff, including myself, that is not there yet, and there's a bunch of people with contributed project applications in the queue. So I think that will continue to grow here over time, especially as people start building more sites with Backdrop. They're going to have more modules they need and hopefully find a way to either port them over or get them working or something or other. So what that means is that we've got a whole bunch of people doing a bunch of work, which is good, but the Backdrop Contrib group is not the best way to necessarily find projects that people are working on. So we do have in mind we want to put the ability to list these modules on backdropcms.org, our primary website, the same way that Drupal.org lists its modules on its site. And so as soon as we get backdropcms.org ported to Backdrop, we'll start adding those new features there so that people can have a better way of finding things. And once that feature is added, people will also be able to add modules and themes and layouts there that aren't part of the Backdrop Contrib group. So that way we'll be able to kind of define the canonical source of any project without having to search that group in order to find it. So if you have something that's hosted somewhere else, or in your private repository or company repository or something on GitHub, rather than being in the group, you'll be able to link it there, and people will be able to find it more easily. So I think that's pretty good, considering we've been around for a month. It kind of means we're meeting our goal. Our goal is for people to port things quickly, and it looks like things are getting ported quickly, so that's a good sign. We should talk about a couple of things that aren't Backdrop here at the top of the meeting. The first and foremost thing that we have been missing in the Backdrop world is Drush. And we do have a bunch of people who have committed to working on that. Greg Anderson, who's one of the Drush maintainers, is doing some refactoring of Drush anyway. And so we get to be his use case for that, I guess, which is kind of useful. He's done a bunch of work this week. He's got 2 pull requests, I think, that are pending that help refactor the bootstrap process of Drush that will allow it to identify a local copy of Drush to use instead of a system-wide one. So if you dropped a copy of Drush into your Backdrop root directory that happened to be Backdrop specific, Drush would pick that up instead of the main version of Drush, which I think is a good first step. If we can get a Backdrop specific version of Drush working, then that would give everyone who's working on Backdrop sites as well as Drupal sites an easy way to kind of swap them out one for the other. And then we do have longer term plans for Drush itself to include these changes rather than having to kind of run a modified version of it. But that might not be in the 7 stable version that's coming out soon. That might be in a more future branch. So we'll have kind of a stable version that you can use all the time, and then a kind of a Backdrop specific version that we're working on, which I think will get us to using Drush sooner, which I think will make everyone really happy. So we've got some progress moving on there. If anyone's super interested in working on Drush, the issues, there's one in the Backdrop queue. It's issue number 47, which is how we make Backdrop work with Drush. And then the Drush issue is issue 342. And there's a whole bunch of cross-linking and stuff from one to the other if you're interested in all of the work that's going on for refactoring and the larger plan of how to get those working. Another thing that we need to get going for Backdrop, especially now that we've had our first security release, is that Backdrop itself needs to be able to let you know when an update is available. And in order for that to happen, Backdrop needs to know which version it's running and which version it should be running. And so right now we have an update server that just returns a single response of not implemented yet. So we need to think about how do we change the server to actually recognize the version of Backdrop? How do we change Backdrop to notify the server of what version it's on? And then do that same process again for contrib as well as for core. And I know Nate has been doing a bunch of thinking lately on how we are actually going to do this in terms of packaging scripts on GitHub and all of that good stuff. I think we have a pretty good plan. We just need to kind of put it in action. I know right now Nate is really busy with doing things like working on token path auto and upgrading Backdrop's primary website, and so we haven't been making a lot of progress on the update server. So if we had someone else who wanted to kind of help pick up the slack in some of these other areas, I think that would help a little bit too. So we do know we need an update server. We have a plan for how to do it. We're not actively working on it right now. We could use some help on the update server if you want to work on that, or some help on some of these other things too, which would help, I think, make more hours in the day, which would be good.
Yeah, one thing about the update server is that one of the reasons why it's kind of postponed is that we'd like to get backdropcms.org itself updated to Backdrop before we start building GitHub integrations directly into it, because what we're going to need is when a new release is created on GitHub, it will update a node on the main website saying what the current release is and things like that. And we could write that integration against the site as it is right now, but the current site is Drupal 7, and we'd like to get the site updated to Backdrop first and then build out the GitHub integration. But I mean, I guess in reality we could probably do them out of order if we wanted to, or we could start building the GitHub integration against a generic Backdrop site and then integrate it into backdropcms.org later. That would probably be the best way to go. I just added a link to the agenda that is has to do with packaging and updating version strings automatically for the use of contrib. It's kind of a related issue that as we're creating new releases of contrib projects too, there's been a lot of confusion this week because I tagged final versions of token and path auto, but if you use the final releases of those projects, the version information is not on the modules page. And that's because in the Drupal contrib land, whenever you make a new release, the version information is automatically added for you into the package information, like into the .info file saying what version it is, and it reads the git tag and then injects that into the .info files. And we don't have that functionality yet, but we could, and still host the files on GitHub, because under the Backdrop contrib group, we have the ability and permissions to modify the archives that GitHub itself hosts. So we can get notified of a new release being made, download the tar file, expand it, modify the contents of it, and then push it back up to GitHub, and they'll host the modified version for us, which is pretty sweet.
Well, for every project in the contrib group, we can do that. But if you want to host your own, you're either going to have to include your own packaging script, and we can probably open source those files too, or just manually add in the version string.
Yep. So there's that's issue 51 in the backdropcms.org queue. There's a whole bunch of queues that it's a little bit messy, but if you didn't know, there's besides the Backdrop organization on GitHub, there's also Backdrop contrib, which is where the contrib modules live, and then there's also Backdrop-ops, and Backdrop-ops is where all of the things like the API website, the flagship website, the application process for applying to contrib, a whole bunch of other repositories around the operations of Backdrop are all in there, and that includes this issue and others about integrating with GitHub. So I don't know, I feel like we're making some progress there, and that the research has been done saying that it's possible to do it, but the actual code we haven't even started on yet. So soon.
Soon.
Okay, that's all I got. Sorry.
So related to that was this concept we had of creating a Backdrop service where on GitHub you can edit a GitHub project and you can check a box saying that this is a Backdrop specific project. We still want to do that. We want anyone who creates a project anywhere on GitHub to be able to identify it as a project for Backdrop. But all that we'll do behind the scenes is add it to the Backdrop primary website as the equivalent of a sandbox project. So like Drupal.org lets you create sandbox projects that aren't actually listed in the official module listings unless you specifically search for sandbox projects. We're going to do the same thing with Backdrop, where to create an official project, you're going to have a node on the Backdrop site that will say, you know, this is the project description, here's a screenshot, here's where the documentation lives, all of that stuff just like you have on Drupal.org. But if you wanted to just create a GitHub project and tick a box and say this is a sandbox project for a Backdrop, we can import that information too, as long as we have a service on GitHub. So that involves, I think, creating like a Ruby, fork a Ruby project that's already on there and file a pull request back. And I thought last week, I was like, oh, for sure, I can just we can do this really quick. But it didn't have the right environment set up on my computer to test everything. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't create a pull request without testing it. So I didn't actually do it. But if anyone who works in Ruby or wants to learn how to, wants to play with that, it should be pretty easy to create a new service. All you have to do is fork it, and they even give you a good example of what your service should do. There are a couple of things that we could include that our service would do. Right now we don't have anything built. So I think like we can add a checkbox, but it won't do any good yet because we aren't actually checking for that checkbox or doing anything if a project has that box checked. So I don't think that's super urgent, although I thought it would be quick and I could do it last week. I determined it was not, for me anyway. So that's also something that we want to do eventually, but I don't think it's super high priority. Okay, so we have this awesome new API site. Nate, did you add that change in the last week, or was that the one that updated the search box? Or was that before then?
I think it was week before last, but I don't think we mentioned it.
We should mention it because it's awesome.
The API site, we got it updated with some fancy new functionality. The search box on it now acts a whole lot like the search box for PHP.NET, where it will autocomplete function names, constants, class names, etc. But if you just type words in there instead of a function name and don't use the autocomplete, it will act like a normal search. So that can be kind of handy. Like I was searching for a function the other day because I was getting function not found in a Backdrop port. and I pasted in the function that wasn't found, and instead of pulling up the function definition, because that function doesn't exist, it found the change log record, which was super handy. And then I could see that that function had just been renamed to something else. So it's really nice. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. We actually use the exact same library as PHP.NET itself did, which is Twitter type ahead for anyone that's curious. So yeah, some nice little updates to the API website that make it really nice to use. I guess also on the topic of the API websites, Doc Wilmot's been doing an amazing job writing up change records and documentation. Right now, everybody needs an account to create documentation on the API website, and right now it's exclusively developer documentation. If you'd like to help with adding documentation, we'd be more than happy to create accounts for you. Right now, it's admin-only approval until we open up backdropcms.org itself to general account creation, which is in the plan as soon as we get projects actually hosted and built on backdropcms.org. But for now, if you want to write API documentation, we have to invite you. So let us know if you have a penchant for documentation, and we'd love to have your help.
And there are, I think, only 2 change records that need to be added that are new since Backdrop 1 came out. And then anyone who's working on the API side, if you find anything, we haven't done a super thorough review of what's on there, so if you find anything that needs to be changed, just let us know. We can update it. But I think it's a really great start. So yeah, we are working on the API site. There's also some other stuff we want to introduce there, like single sign-on with GitHub, so that you don't have to create new accounts everywhere if you don't want to. But again, they all also need to single sign-on with the primary website, so we're going to try and get all this done in the right order eventually. But yeah, and then of course after we get the main site ported to Backdrop, we'll be able to turn on logins, we'll be able to allow people to create nodes for their modules, we'll be able to integrate with the service on GitHub. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's kind of like backed up on that initial port. And I think we've got, I think maybe it was like 3 modules left that need to be ported. There's a handful of little ones, and then we need to just do the migration and see how it goes, or the upgrade. So we're working on it. So other things, let's see, we started a new forum in a subreddit for Backdrop, just to see, everyone wanted a place to go and talk about stuff that wasn't an issue queue, which isn't great for conversation. And surprising is, I think the subreddit's actually working pretty well. Every now and then I go over there and I look at stuff, and there's a whole bunch of conversations going on, and there's useful information. So I think that's a pretty good place for us to leave it to start with. I think longer term, we'll continue to evaluate how it's working, and if there are things that we need to do that we can't do there. I noticed I had problems posting an image. We'll see if we can try and solve those problems in other ways, or moving off of Reddit if we have to. So other things, let's see, we've got some, we did a security release this week, so that was just yesterday. So we don't have any new bug fixes, so we haven't queued up a next date for our next bug fix release. But I'm sure we'll get some any day now. I mean, we've got plenty of bugs. We'll get them fixed, or we'll find new ones and fix them. And we'll schedule another release, but we don't have one scheduled for now. So our next major milestone is that Backdrop 1.1 will be released on May 15th. And we currently have a list of things queued up for the 1.1 release, including adding a rich text editor to core, which is something that is super important but is also super hard. Adding token module interface, path auto, and getting our own branding to the administration look and feel. And so as far as token and path auto, Nate is doing a ton of work on the contrib projects for those, which is the first step to moving them to core, is getting a contrib project that actually works, a module you can install and turn on and does what it does is important. And then we're going to kind of look at how the current contrib projects work and say, is that how we want them to work in core? And there are some things in particular that we will be changing a little bit. When they're in core, they don't need to add their own interfaces. They can integrate with existing interfaces and stuff like that. So I think we're getting pretty close on that. And then the rich text editor, we haven't actually made any progress on. We've kind of talked about how it should work. We've talked about how libraries should work in Backdrop. There's a kind of non-consensus on how to solve all of these problems. So the CK editor integration, Irish text editor in core, is something that is likely to not make that 1.1 cutoff date unless we can solve some of these other problems a little bit faster. So that's the one thing that is looking not likely at this moment. But we do have some progress happening in the other fronts. I don't know if you want to give any specific updates on token and path auto.
Yeah, there's not much to them other than
they're working.
Then they're working now. They're totally fully working. We had to do a couple of changes because Backdrop has a new built-in dialog API, and previously Token was using its own dialogues. Now we're using the built-in dialog API of Backdrop, which is nice. But other than that, now, yeah, they're just working modules. They should be totally functionally an API equivalent to Drupal 7, but I don't know, that entire situation is a little bit temporary because when they get built into core, they probably won't be API compatible because things like the path auto namespace will probably go away, and it will just be part of path module. So I would say if you're building a Backdrop site now, feel free to use token and path auto as they are right now. But if you're a contrib author, it's probably not a good idea to start integrating with the path auto and token modules that we have today because they probably won't be the same ones that, I mean, it won't be identical to what's built into core because they'll actually be built into various modules rather than being standalone.
Okay. And then as far as our admin look and feel, I believe that our style guide is now done, which is good. We've got a good guideline as to what our administration interface should feel like. And we've got two people, Randy Norwood and Wes, who are willing to start working on taking the styles from our style guide and figuring out how they should actually be integrated into core. So we've got some things that we can put directly into core. If it's just like a CSS change on something quick, we can put that into a system module or wherever the CSS came from. And some things that are specific to our current administration theme, which is called 7, we need to put those changes into 7. Or things that require markup changes for elements also might need to get put into 7 because we don't want to be changing markup that's coming directly out of core. So we have to kind of look at it one element at a time and figure out, like, how do you change this thing in a way that makes sense and isn't going to break other people who are working on, contributed administration themes and stuff like that. So we have a style guide, which is the most important step, and we're working on figuring out how getting those changes in will work. So I think that's underway, and I think we're on track to get a new feel by 1.1. So when people install Backdrop, it won't feel like they're using Drupal. It'll feel like a different product, which I think is super important for us long term. So there's other stuff that isn't necessarily earmarked for the 1.1 milestone, but things that I think are really important for us to be working on throughout improvement of Backdrop. And those two major categories are user experience improvements and developer experience improvements. All issues for user experience have a title that starts with UX. At least if I've noticed their user experience issues and they say UX. If you're creating an issue that's specifically related to user experience, please add that prefix at the beginning of your title. And then that way you can search the GQ for all issues containing UX if you care about usability and start working on improving things like that. Same thing goes for developer experience. We've got a DX in the front of the issue title in square brackets to indicate developer experience issues. We have to be careful about how much developer experience progress we can make in 1.0 because we have, or in the 1.x branch at all, because we can't break APIs. So if we can add helper functions or backwards compatibility wrappers, those kinds of things are possible. But in terms of changing the way existing functions work, we can't do it without breaking APIs. So we need to kind of be careful with those, but it's good to document them so that if we find something that's a big problem or something that people are struggling with a lot in Backdrop, we can fix it in Backdrop 2 just to make sure that people will be able to port quicker, people will be able to understand, guess what things should be and be correct with their guessing. So making it easier to code for is just as important as making it easy to collect together. So there's links in the agenda for today that link to user experience and developer experience issues, but you can also just search the queue for those square bracket tags, and that'll get you those same issues too. All right, so that's what we're working on in terms of Backdrop Core. There's obviously a ton of issues in the queue that we aren't talking about every week just because we have a bunch of priorities. Bug fixes, obviously we'll be looking at those all the time. Anytime anyone submits a bug and someone fix it, we'll try and get it into the next bug fix release. Again, all of those fixes need to be API compatible with the current version, but that hasn't been a problem yet and probably won't be for most issues, so that will be good. And then, yeah, there's a ton of issues. If you fix something, we'll either designate it for a specific upcoming release in 1.x, or if it's something that we don't think is a big priority, it might get pushed to 2.x, or if you have a feature request, same thing. If we know when we can fix it, we'll tag it with a specific milestone. If it doesn't get done by the milestone, that'll obviously just get pushed forward to the next one, but we'll just keep plugging forward as much as we can. Every Thursday after this meeting, we usually have a little sprint. We meet in our IRC channel, which is #Backdrop, and we try and crank out a bunch of stuff on Backdrop. Right now, I'm going to be working on porting modules and working on backdropcms.org. If anyone else wants to work on bug fixes or user experience or whatever, anything you're particularly interested in, you can join us in the IRC channel and #Backdrop. If you're not an IRC user, you can find us on Twitter. You can tweet at us at Backdrop CMS. We have a contact form on our website now, which actually works. So if you are not on Twitter or not on IRC, you can use the contact form. We're in this meeting every week. We usually have a session at the end. We're going to open up here in a little bit that lets people talk to us, which is good. And then if you need some extra help, sometimes you can convince Nate or I to email you to help with something if none of those other communication channels are working for you. But we do like to have as many people as we can work together on Thursday afternoons. So if you're able to get time from your boss or yourself or whoever to work on Backdrop, working with us on Thursday is good because we're usually around to help answer questions or point people in the right direction if you need a task to work on. So we're doing that today and again next week, every Thursday for the foreseeable future, which will be great. We do have some upcoming events for Backdrop. We have posted 2 calendars now. You can get links to those, the iCal feeds on our Reddit, which is good. There's one calendar which just includes weekly meetings like this one. We have this meeting every Thursday. We have another one fortnightly, which happens an hour earlier, which is our design review meeting. That's where we talk about things like, redesigning the administration theme or building the modules finder page on backdropcms.org. Where we try and talk about more design-focused things so that our designers don't have to be here for the whole developer meeting and developers don't have to be there for the whole design meeting. But we haven't had as many design tasks lately as developer tasks, so we've split that into a fortnightly meeting, so it's once every 2 weeks. But as things go forward, we'll try and see if that schedule continues to work out, and the iCal feed will reflect our actual schedule. The other calendar is for Drupal events that are Backdrop friendly. So if you're planning on attending a Drupal camp and you want to talk about Backdrop, there are some in particular that have reached out to us and asked us to come and attend and talk to their attendees about Backdrop. 2 in our near future are Stand Camp, which is up here in 2 weeks in San Diego. Nate and I will be attending. We're going to be giving a talk on Backdrop. Darius and
Maybe we could use help with the name Ensenwa. also known as Clickbox on GitHub. There you go.
Ezenwa.
There we go. Sorry, it's so embarrassing.
Yeah, we'll be doing a training. I should get that right. At Sand Camp on Backdrop, it's going to be a half-day training, which will be super useful for people who are new to Backdrop, just to see, like, hey, I know Drupal 7, I don't know what is this Backdrop business. Or people who are, curious about both could maybe do a half-day on Drupal and a half-day on Backdrop and see what it'll be like. Yeah. We're going to be doing a training on pronouncing names. So that'll happen at Sand Camp, which is good. And then we'll be able to talk to people about Backdrop throughout the camp, too, and they're going to be Backdrop friendly. And then we also will be at Mid Camp, which is in Chicago in March. So if anyone has had too much sun from hanging out in San Diego in February and wants a little bit more cold, we can definitely go to Chicago in March. And we'll be able to talk about Backdrop there. I don't think we've proposed a section there yet, and I'm going to do a keynote on PHP. It's just a little bit more general and not specific to Backdrop or Drupal. But there will be people there who will be friendly about talking about Backdrop as well. So we're trying to be, trying to be fairly cautious about how far into the Drupal world we are inserting Backdrop, because there are people in the Drupal community that don't want to hear about Backdrop. So in general, we won't propose a talk at a camp unless we're specifically asked to, either by the organizers of the camp or people who are attending the camp and saying, I want to hear about this at this camp. So if you want to hear about Backdrop at some camp that you are attending, you need to reach out to us and let us know, because we're not going to try and just show up and talk about it without being specifically asked. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of events. Nate and I will also be at Drupal Con LA. We have not proposed a Backdrop talk at a Drupal Con, specifically LA, because we think that's maybe not going to be well received. We were requested by organizers from Bogota to propose a talk in Bogota, so we proposed one, but then we got in trouble for it. So we asked them to take it down. So there's definitely some like non-consensus even in the organizers of Drupal Cons as whether they want to hear Backdrop or not. So I think for now we're just going to keep not mentioning or not talking about Backdrop in official sessions at DrupalCon. We will be in LA. We're probably going to do a BOF or something more informal. Maybe we'll do a dinner where anyone who's attending DrupalCon LA would like to go to dinner and talk about it. That's definitely something we're open to. We'll be there anyway. You can talk to us about it. But yeah, we've got to be kind of careful in the Drupal community as to not upset people more than necessary. All right, other things coming up. We have a Drupal Watchdog article, which will be out in May, I think in time for DrupalCon LA, where I wrote an article that talks about very specific differences between Drupal 7 and Backdrop, specifically CMI and configuration management, including code samples and best practices and stuff like that, which should be pretty interesting. And Nate wrote a little FAQ article about all of the questions that we get asked all the time about Backdrop that kind of helps answer some questions about, you know, how does contrib work and what is security and how do you deal with, you know, general problems, which I think will also be really useful to readers of the magazine. So hopefully those are going to be well received. And that's the end of our announcements. So let's go ahead and open it up for a couple of minutes to see if anyone has any questions or anything that we should talk about in this weekly meeting.
Anybody? Anything? Well, thank you all for joining. This is quite the crowd. It's exciting to see so many people in our meeting.
All right. Well, we will then break and go to the IRC channel and start working on a sprint. I did see one question here from Ken asking if Wysiwyg module is going to be part of Backdrop. We're planning on putting a rich text editor in core. That's one of our hit list items for the 1.1 release that may not make it. It's not going to be the Wysiwyg module, though. The Wysiwyg module provides a generic API for integrating with any Wysiwyg editors. We want to specifically integrate with one, and that's going to be CK Editor, the same editor that Drupal 8 chose to integrate with. And all of the implementation and integration for that specific editor is going to be very deep and very thorough, rather than a kind of a shallow, abstract integration like Wysiwyg module does now. And our hope is that if we do one integration really well, no one will care what the library is or want to change it up for another one because we're going to do it so well with the first one, people will just use that. So that's the plan. We'll see how far we can get. But yeah, we've also kind of steered away from using the word Wysiwyg because it's not really what you see is what you get unless it also incorporates the position of fields and images and layout and other stuff. What it really is rich text. And so we're calling it a rich text editor instead of a Wysiwyg editor, just to set the right precedent for what it is we're going to create. So it's on our hit list. We know it's super important. Nate was actually responsible for doing much of the work of the Wysiwyg editor that went into Drupal 8. So we've done this before. Nate's done this before anyway. And so we have a plan for how to do it. We just have to get everything working. Nate just posted a link to that issue 2 in our issue queue. It's issue number 101.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that like even though we're going to be including CK Editor and Core because that's the easiest and most direct path forward, and there's a lot of really good reasons to use that editor in particular. The functionality of Wysiwyg module that integrates with the filter system that makes it so that an individual text format is associated with an individual Wysiwyg editor. That functionality we will be building directly into core as part of filter module. So it won't really be that CK editor is needing to modify core to inject itself like CK editor module does today. Instead, we'll be updating the filter module to support Wysiwyg editors, and then CK editor module will be leveraging that. So basically, kind of a lot of the integration with the filter system that Wysiwyg module provides today will be built directly into filter module, and then the CK editor module will just leverage that integration. So it's kind of a little bit of a mix.
So it also looks like we have someone, actually a bunch of people working on redirect module. Andy and Jeff. And I know we've got a bunch of people all working on linked module at the same time too. But yeah, so there are some problems with upgrades. If you guys want to get together in IRC after this, and we can kind of figure out what problems, like, you know, especially if there's 2 ports, if we've got one problem one and one problem the other, and they're not, we can kind of push them together and get the working versions of both. That would be great. So the last question is contact module. I think the only documentation we have on contact module is Drupal's documentation on contact module. So I would say it hasn't changed at all since Drupal 7. So if we can find something on Drupal.org, we might be able to include docs on that somewhere on our site too. I know our user guide on the API or on the primary Backdrop CMS.org site right now is lacking in concepts. It's got some very specific things like how to install a module and how to install a theme, but it doesn't have a like what is a block or what is a layout, kind of a high-level conceptual explanation of fields or anything like that, which I think would be super useful. And things like contact module could maybe get listed there too. Like these are the building blocks for your site. So we need some documentation on that. Yeah, we should add some docs. More docs are good. Generally speaking, I guess Drupal has too many docs, but we're missing some. We need some more. So yeah, there's Nate just posted a link in the chat too for documentation on contact module, so hopefully that will help with that. Are there any other questions, or should we dissolve? Okay, well, let's go ahead and stop for this week. It was a nice long meeting. We covered a lot of stuff, which I think is good. We've got a lot of people here. Thank you all for coming to join. And if you have more questions, you can find us in IRC. You can use the contact form on the website. You can tweet at us. Anything you can think of to reach us is fine. And we will be here again next time, same time next week.
All right. Thanks so much, bye, guys. Bye-bye.